Keep the housed housed. My name is Ellen Clark, and I co-chair Interfaith Housing Justice Davis, along with my good friend Barbara Clutter over here. Interfaith Housing is an alliance of faith communities in Davis who are concerned about the limited housing options that are available in our town for low and moderate income individuals and families. Our group arose from a deep dive into Richard Rothstein's Color of Law, which explains how government-sponsored, blatantly racist laws and practices bake segregation into the United States and into our own Davis community. The goal of our group is to push the needle toward housing justice for all. A bit of housekeeping. Our team is handing out question cards, or they will as soon as I'm done. Oh, there they are, passing them out. We'll be collecting them as our last speakers make their presentations in preparation for our panel discussion. After our session, please visit the tables of the many nonprofit organizations that we have in the back and on the sides. Tackling housing is a team effort. Chat with these folks representing these groups and learn more about their work. Back rooms are in the back right corner for me. That would be the left to you. We have some light refreshments in the back. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our Master of Ceremonies, our very own Josh Chapman, Mayor of the City of Davis.
Thank you and welcome everyone. First, I want to thank everyone for being here this evening. Thank everyone who took their time to put this together. It's an honor to be a part of this, to be asked to moderate this panel discussion. And when you look up to my right, the panel that's sitting here tonight, it crosses all spectrums of folks who have provided, continue to provide services to folks in our community. So thank you so much for being here. And taking your time to be part of this very important community discussion. A few quick housekeeping pieces. As Ellen said, I will come up and introduce each person that will speak. We'll go down the line. They have some slides here, and then we'll come back for a panel discussion after. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Reverend Connie Simon, Unitarian Universalist Church of Davis, and she will step up now.
Hi. So I prepared what I wanted to say, and then when I walked in the door, someone said to me, "You're a short timer, just let them have it." Because I've been here for just short of 2 years, and as of June 30th, my service as the interim minister of the UU Church of Davis will end, and I'll be moving on to help another church through transition. But that's not what I want to talk to you about. What I want to talk to you about is the day 2 years ago I got the call that said, "You're going to Davis, California." This is the process. It happens for us. It's always this week in May. And I started making phone calls to apartment complexes in Davis. And I said, I need a place to live for July. I'd like 2 bedrooms, and I want some outdoor space with assigned parking, and pool would be nice, and some things. And their reaction was like yours. One place actually laughed at me and said, "You should have been here in January or February." I said, "That's not possible." And it was true. And that is why I serve the Unitarian Universalist Church of Davis, and I live in West Sacramento. And I've wondered about Davis housing. It made me start thinking as I drove around, I said, I'm going to check this out even more and more, and I saw there's not enough housing here. And what is here is too expensive for the people who are here. And I got to call it out, I wasn't seeing a lot of people who look like me. I wasn't seeing a lot of black and brown people in the neighborhoods where I thought I wanted to live. And I'm not sure what that says. That's for you to decide. The next thing I did was drive around in West Sacramento and Sacramento. And I saw people who were unhoused living in ways that I had never seen before. I'm an East Coast girl. Homelessness looks different for us. I had never seen whole blocks of people living in tents. Or when I drive from West Sac and come here to come to the church, there are always tents along Capitol Highway or along Jefferson or when I get off 80. That's not acceptable. It's not. Or the fact that there is a woman who lives in her car and comes and parks her car in my apartment complex because it's safe. Something about this picture isn't right. The cost of housing here is absurd. It's absurd, and there's not enough. And even if you can get housing, even if you can, how do you pay for the $5 gas? How do you pay for the expensive groceries? We have an equity issue in our society, a big one. So people say to me, yeah, Reverend Connie, it's like that. I worked hard. Why can't they just work hard? Where? Where are they going to work? And as I said, many of them are already working. How much salary would you have to make to even be able to afford a small apartment here? It's not sustainable. And whose job is it to fix it? Well, Reverend Connie, you're the minister. Tell us what to do. I can't. I don't know what to do in every place. But what I do know is that it is my work to do. What I do know is that it is your work to do as well. If we are to truly be living in community, it is our religious and moral imperative. It is our obligation to make sure that our neighbors have shelter, that our neighbors have food, that they have access to clean water, that they have access to quality education. That is our work to do. Not because it gives us pride to be standing out and being up at the stage and saying all these things, but because it's the right thing to do. I have been thinking about why. Why is it our job to do? Because, one, we are better together. There are so many problems in the world right now. So many things going on. We can't fix just one thing. They are all interconnected, as are we. So we are much better when we work together to solve these problems. Don't just say, I do housing, I don't do hunger. I do climate, I don't do race. They are all connected. You can't say, well, I'm Catholic, I'm Jewish, I'm this, I'm that. We are all connected. We must do this work together. Despite having different beliefs, we should be able to work together as a society to address these problems that are plaguing us right now, whether it be housing, hunger, or job opportunities. So no matter what faith we profess, whether or how we worship, the connections between us are sacred as individuals. We may be speaking different languages and voicing different theologies, or maybe no theology at all. Maybe you are humanist or atheist or agnostic. It doesn't matter. We are humans existing together in this space. And at the root of that connection is a thread of humanity that connects us all. At the root of that is this light that is shining in every one of us. Not just me, the minister, but yes, it's shining in the woman who's living in her car. It's shining in the student who's outside. It's shining in each one of you. Who are we to decide that one person's situation is not worth our concern? could be us tomorrow. For many of us, that's all it would take. One paycheck, one drop in the stock market, the loss of a retirement account, your company folding, an illness, or one major car repair. We are all but an inch away. So my charge to each of you is to keep an open heart and an open mind tonight so that we can envision what's possible. My charge to each of you is to take courage to do the work that needs to be done and to look for creativity and innovation in new ways of doing it. To be resilient and determined, and to be fearless in taking risks. We have no choice but to do this together. We're not going to make it if we try to go it alone. Let's do the work.
Thank you so much, Reverend Connie, Simon. Really do appreciate that. And you touched on so many pieces. And I think for me, talking about the connectedness and interconnectedness, and that again, we look up and the folks that are lining the walls and the backside of this room display that work that we need to do and the work that we can do together. So thank you so much. And I am so fortunate and happy that I am not sitting to your right and have to follow up what you just did. So I'm going to turn that responsibility over to Roberto Gimenez, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Mutual Housing of California. Welcome, Roberto.
I'm not used to seeing a room this full of people who are not opponents of affordable housing. They're smiling faces and some laughing. I wish I could see this more often. Why should we care about affordable housing? For all of the reasons that Connie said. Because our values tell us it's important. But even for those whose values aren't aligned with ours, there are a lot of practical reasons to believe that affordable housing is necessary. People who work in a community should be able to afford to live in that community and not have to commute 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to and from work. Less time spent in traffic leads to healthier individuals, healthier families, healthier children, and communities and the environment. Merely treating housing as a commodity, like crude oil or coffee, is what got us into this situation. Now, I'm not opposed to market rate housing at all. It's absolutely necessary. It's a part of the equation. But treating all housing as a commodity is why we're standing here today. Mutual Housing's background is we were founded in 1988. We started working in Davis in 2006. We started working with YOLO Mutual Housing. It was actually Sacramento Mutual Housing and YOLO Mutual Housing. We merged in 2007 and eventually became Mutual Housing California. We have a portfolio of about 1,400 units, 400 units of housing in Yolo County. 300 of those are in Davis proper. 6 properties within Davis, so they're all smaller properties. And we have 1,000 units in Sacramento. Within a year and a half, 2 years, we'll have over 2,000 units of housing across the region. So who lives in our housing? You can see up here, our history is that 75% of the folks who live in our housing are families. In the last 7 years or so, we've started branching out a bit. And so we have several different types of housing. We will begin serving veterans next year in Solano County, so we're branching out there too. Historically, next slide, what we've done is garden-style walk-ups, rather suburban style that's well-suited to this sort of environment. But we're also doing a lot of urban infill these days, a much more larger style of housing. Most of the properties we built here are 50, 60 units or smaller. In Sacramento, they'll be up to 250 units in one property. Our model and our origins are actually in what's called social housing, where residents are involved in the governance of the property, and they'll have an ownership stake in that property. In some ways, it's like a condominium. The model that started in 1988 didn't fit with the tax credit model, and so that model disbanded. But we did keep a number of elements of the social housing model, and one was engagement of people and development of community. So the housing is a vehicle for engagement and for building stronger communities and helping people get access where they historically have not had access. To that end, we even have board members who are residents of our housing, and at this point, 50% of our board are residents who live in that housing, who inform our work and are deeply engaged. One of those is sitting here tonight. She was just down at the Capitol yesterday advocating for more affordable housing with a number of other residents of affordable housing across the state. Our current vice chair lives in affordable housing in Davis, and our former board chair of 6 years lived in affordable housing in Davis. Those are not opportunities that come around to people who are unhoused or generally living even in affordable housing. Next slide. So what happens when people do get into affordable housing? You'll see some of the impacts. Hunger decreases, children have access to schools, family incomes increase, and we have increased engagement, as you see here. Right? New opportunities for people. Next slide. We're also really committed to sustainable housing and its impact on the people who live in that housing, on the corporation, the nonprofit corporation that we run, and the communities that we live in. So yes, Connie's right. We do the environment and we do housing. We built the first zero net energy multifamily community in the nation. And we are building our third one next year, which will be escalating that. We'll be using battery systems that kick in automatically to offset power usage during peak hours, decreasing impact to the grid and decreasing costs to the residents who live in that housing. Sustainable housing is possible. We need to reset the standards, and you should expect that your public dollars are spent on sustainable housing. Next slide. Historically, affordable housing, since the late 80s, the low-income housing tax credit was the primary source of funding for housing. It covered 100% of the cost. Over time, what you'll see is that came down to 50 to 75% of the cost. There are a number of reasons for that. The biggest one is labor. The second one is material costs. And the third is regulation of affordable housing. So know that as you implement standards that are more sustainable, more environmentally friendly, it does drive the cost up, but not permanently, right? The market will adapt to it, and we should be pushing that. We are committed to going zero net energy on all of our future projects that we do, right? And we need your support to be able to do that. Next slide. So where does the money come from if 100% doesn't come from tax credits? All of these sources. Historically, it would be some federal money, some federal programs, and some state programs. Increasingly, that is not enough. And currently, we have to find a third source, at least a third source, to fill the gap in order to be able to develop that housing. We are taking private donations, so we are sometimes building private partnerships too, and working with market rate developers. And that's great for us. That's great for the community. It's two different types of housing in one community. The last place, well, we have nonprofit foundations. Increasingly, we're going to private foundations for funding. And that's a tricky one because we can't bank on it, right? It's there sometimes, sometimes it's not. So we have to spend a lot of time advocating and building relationships with particular foundations together. That leaves cities and your housing trust funds. That is a critical source. When you have a permanent source of financing, those developers, nonprofit like us, can count on some source of money being available, and we can start to plan for new housing. Otherwise, we're spending most of our time chasing dollars. The two most difficult parts of developing affordable housing are access to land, Davis, and access to dollars. Also Davis in this case, right? It's not true in every jurisdiction. Some have land and some have money. In your case, you've got a lack of both. Next slide. Why should we care about affordable housing? That patchwork of programs is not sufficient. We're playing three-dimensional chess, trying to put all these programs together. I've seen projects that have 14 different sources of funding built into them. That's an incredibly difficult thing to manage, and it takes a long time. We all want thriving communities. We all want healthier communities, which lead to healthier people. It's not the other way around, right? Our communities have to be healthy to generate healthy people. Unhealthy communities don't generate healthy people. Housing should not be treated simply as a commodity. Thanks.
Thank you, Roberto. And I encourage you, if you have your cards that they've passed around as some of the speakers are up here talking, if something inspires you or questions pop up, please feel free to write those down. We're going to be collecting those when we get towards the end of the panel, and we'll have some round robin, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. So if something is there for you, please feel free to write it down. We'll get them collected and go from there. Next up, we have Dana Bailey. The City of Davis, we are very fortunate to have Dana come on board, I believe almost 2 years ago now. Back prior to that, the City Council created a Department of Social Services and Housing, and Dana was the first hire in that department. And over the past 18 months, has continually grown that department in relationships with many of the people who are here in the audience today. We're very thankful that we have Dana on our city staff. I know Iris Grace is here as well, who works on Dana's team. And without further ado, Dana Bailey, thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. As the mayor explained, we have started a new department at the City of Davis, and a lot of that is thanks to the community, a lot of the work that the council saw needed to be done in the community, and a lot of the support. So I'm here to talk about what our department does and how it integrates with what we need to be seeing for the people that, there you go, for folks that are the most vulnerable in our community. So next slide, please. So let me tell you a little bit about our social services and housing department. And you'll see that our mission is really to serve the most vulnerable people in Davis in an equitable manner. So most of what we do through our department is serving people that are extremely low to moderate income. And so for our department, as we began the process of putting it together, we really had simply three goals. The first one was, let's get staffed up. Let's get people that are subject matter experts that can talk to us about what social services we need to have, how do we look at affordable housing, and how do we address that in the City of Davis. Second, it's how do we want to proceed? And that was to become a data-driven department. What is the information that's out there telling us? Who are we going to speak to, and what agencies are we going to work with, so we can get data to kind of decide where do we want to put our resources. And then finally, it's where are our partnerships going to be? And we were extremely fortunate in having a number of community partners and provider partners and relationships with Yolo County Health and Human Services Agency and with Yolo County Housing Authority to kind of pull together, what are you seeing? What historically are you seeing? And then what's that impact in Davis? And what can this department do about it? Next slide. So one of the things that our department really does is, because we're looking at vulnerable people, we wanted to find out, so what will inform how we move forward? So we really looked at what are the social determinants of health? What makes for a healthy community? And those are some of the factors that, from the World Health Organization standpoint, these are the factors that make for a healthy community, all the things that make you thrive. And for our department, our focus in this realm is really affordable housing and social supports. And then we have partnerships that we have with other community organizations and other government agencies that are working in those other arenas so that we're all working in tandem. Next slide, please. So when the department came together, we saw immediately that there were some challenges that Davis faced. And really, the challenges that Davis face are challenges that are being faced across the country and are really intense here in California. And you've all seen housing affordability and availability is very high on the list of a barrier to a really solid community. Our service providers have been doing a lot of work in this arena for a number of years. Their capacity is really tight right now. It's hard to hire people. It's hard to bring them to Davis to do the work. They've been doing it for a long time, and the landscape has changed. So that's something that's a challenge. We looked at the lack of uniform data capture from all of these different sources, the availability of treatment beds for people that are experiencing severe mental illness or have a substance abuse disorder. We saw that funding, a lot of people come up to me and go, the state's got all this money. And I go, yes, they do. It'll last for 1 year. What happens after that? How do we sustain the funding? Where do we find sources that are sustainable so we can continue to do the work? And then where's our combined community vision and plan? There are a lot of very involved folks here in Davis, very intelligent folks here in Davis, and everyone's got an idea of what should happen. It's kind of, what's that story they tell about having a blind person look at an elephant and everybody's got a different opinion about what's happening? We kind of had that going on here too. So we as a department wanted to know, how do we address that? So we saw a lot of other opportunities as well. There are opportunities for us to engage more with our local landlords to see what challenges are you faced with and how can we connect people that are unhoused or at risk of being unhoused. How do we connect them to you in a way that makes sense for all parties? We talked about improving our provider relationships. How do we reach out to Davis Community Meals and Housing? How do we reach out to Interfaith Housing Justice? What do we do to kind of bring everyone to the table to have conversations about what it is we're seeing? We thought to address these different approaches, having a uniform a homeless strategic plan would help us as a community come together and say, this is what we think should happen when it comes to housing, and then here are the goals that we want to achieve, and here's the document and what we're going to work from. We talked about reimagining what housing options look like. You know, there's affordable housing, and that's what our arena is, but in affordability, there are a number of things that you can do. Are there ways that we can have shared housing in Davis? What would that look like? So trying to be innovative about the kind of housing approach we take. And then funding opportunities through public and private partnerships. As our friend from Mutual Housing just said, there's a lot of different arenas for getting access to funding, but having all of those things talk together and work together in a cohesive way is always a challenge. How do we facilitate some of that happening? And then, you know, looking at those evolving funding streams and really being mindful of, yes, we'd like to do something, but if we can't sustain it in the community, is that a good use of a resource? Is this where we really want to be? Next slide, please. So everything that we do is really based on the housing continuum. And that continuum is very broad. You can see it starts with folks that are unhoused on the street, and that may move into shelter, that may move to transitional housing, then maybe they get support when they move into their housing. There's community housing and social housing. There's subsidized market rate housing that's available, all the way up to home ownership. That's the continuum. And part of the challenge that all cities in California are faced with are right now there are blockages along those, on that path. There are folks that are in their ownership housing and are going, I can't leave this house. I have this rate. I can't move. Or if I do move, I can't find someplace else to go. So that gets blocked up. And so people that are in rentals that are ready to start moving up, their path has been blocked. And if the rentals aren't moving, then where are people that are trying to transition off of the street? Where are they going to go? So the whole system right now has got a number of blockages in it. So we're always talking about where can we have an impact on this housing continuum? Where does it make sense? Next slide, please. So here's some quick data about what we have here in Davis. So right now we do have affordable for sale units, and that means there are housing units that are restricted to people of a certain income. They have to be low income. They have to income qualify in order to purchase this unit. So we had an inventory of about 125 of these. There's been a lot of movement in the sales right now. So this year, so far, we've sold 4 of those homes to other qualified buyers. We've got 2 pending sales going right now. And then we as a department are making sure that these units that are really reserved specifically for people that income qualify are available to them. They have priority for those units. And then there are 48 affordable apartment complexes here in Davis. The city does not manage those complexes, but we are aware of them. And what we do is we make where those units are available on our website. So you can see where some of these affordable housing complexes are. There are about 2,600 units. And then there's some set-asides. They're not our set-asides, but there are some set-asides, like one set-aside is specifically for farm workers. So there's that too. So if you want to find more information about affordability and affordable housing, you can find it on the city's website. And that's the site. Thank you. So my question when I talk to Davis community members and a number of the advocacy organizations in town and just interested people, because the one thing across the board that Davis shares is people are very compassionate here. They want to see something done. They want to be involved. And if you're a part of an organization, the thing that I ask organizations to do is really take a look at where you are in your organization right now. What's happening with your organization? So if you know what your mission is, fantastic. We're going to ask you, what can you do as an organization to help us along the housing continuum? What kinds of things can you contribute to do that? But also think about, what can't you do right now? There's some things that you may have been able to do pre-COVID that you just don't have the capacity to do anymore. So really narrow in on what is our focus, how does that align with our mission, what do we have the capacity to do, and what can we honestly say we wish we could do. Maybe we can't do it ourselves, but maybe we could do it in collaboration with other people. Understand what that is. And then what are you willing to do? Because it's one thing to propose that we should have X. That's a good way to look at things, but how are we going to actually make that actionable? When we develop our homeless strategic plan, which will be coming out soon, I'm very excited about. When we have our homeless strategic plan, take a look at those goals. What things can you actually take action on where you can spend and devote some time to help us to move along those goals? And if you can't do it by yourself, is there some way that you can collaborate with us to make things happen? So those are the important things that we think in order to impact the housing continuum. That's what we ask of the community through our department. How do we make sure that the people that are most vulnerable in Davis, how do we use some of that collective effort to make sure we meet people where they are and support them where they are on their journey to being housed? So, thank you.
Thank you, Dana. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways for this evening. When we were having conversations prepping for tonight, there were a lot of conversations, right? So we're going to do all this. We're going to have speakers here. We're going to have a panel discussion. We're going to have questions from the audience, and everyone leaves, and what next? right? And I think that's an important piece that Dana touched on here is how do we continue the work after we have these conversations tonight, when we walk out those doors, how do we continue to engage with not just the city, but with nonprofits, with different advocates to continue to do this work. And that is an important piece I know that Georgina and the Interfaith Housing Justice Davis group wants to get out of tonight. So I'd continue to think about that as the overlying theme as we work through this evening. So next up, our next speaker is going to touch a little bit about do we have enough housing and its affordability in Davis. Roberto mentioned access to land and access to dollars as some barriers in Davis. And I would add a third one to that is there's oftentimes conversations in our community that we do not need more housing, that we have enough housing here, and that we don't need to do that. So our next speaker is Judy Andis. She is the Executive Director of Davis Community Action Network, new in the past year or so, has done an amazing job with data and working with the city to provide a lot of the information you're going to hear tonight, and has been a great partner in the work that we're doing here. So welcome, Judy Andis.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me. Can we get a quick round of applause for Interfaith Housing Justice and Dove for putting this on, please? Thank you. My name is Judy Andis, and thank you so much, Mayor Chapman, for the introduction. I'm the Executive Director of Davis Community Action Network, and I'm very proud to be here tonight with all of you. When I was invited to speak, the question that was posed to me is, do we have enough housing and is it affordable? And I joked at the time, no. But that simple answer doesn't tell the story. And so what I'd like to do in the tight 5 minutes that I have, so I'm going to be talking fast, so please excuse me, is instead dig into that no. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of our growth in Davis, where we are right now in terms of our housing stock and access to housing, and then transition, as Josh just set us up perfectly for, to thinking ahead towards how we shift the paradigm for how we add housing and think about housing in the city and in the region. So with that, if you could please, thank you. Picture in your mind, my first question to you is picture home. Think about the first home that came to mind for you. Was it your current home where you live right now? Perhaps it was the childhood home you grew up in. Maybe it was in a city. Maybe you were in an apartment. Maybe you were in another country. Each of us has a slightly different picture that just came to mind. But more likely than not, there are aspects in common for all of us of what we think about when we think about home. Perhaps it was when you were a student and you moved to a new place and you found a sense of belonging for the first time in a new community of people that you found to be like-minded. That's an aspect of home, belonging. Maybe it was the first time that you fell asleep in your bed at night and you felt truly safe. That's an aspect of home, safety. Beyond those two things, right? Safety and shelter we've all shared. That's a basic of the human experience. But belonging, that's another piece of the puzzle. And I'm going to add a third. When you think about home, if you could go to the next slide, perhaps the home that you thought of looked a little like this. This is an iconic image, and it's one that is indicative of our history in the last 70 years or so of growth in suburban America, right? The house that I live in right now actually reflects this, because much of Davis actually reflects this. I live in a single-family zoned home surrounded by other single-family homes with my children who are watching tonight. Hi, boys. And within this American dream, we know that in the land use patterns that came with this boom, many people were rocketed into a different type of prosperity, and many people by design were left out. So if you could go to the next slide. We followed that same pattern. That there on the left is us in 1946, small agricultural hamlet sitting between the Bay Area and Sacramento. And right here on the right, that's us today. That's just an aerial view of our city right now. Now, we followed the fits and bursts of development that other suburban communities followed, which was we did subdivision by subdivision, a burst of 200, a burst of another 200. And then we hit the brakes and we slowed down. And in the last 2 decades, we've had about 4.6 growth after 2010. There are pros and cons to that. Here's a pro. We resisted the urge to expand to sprawl that so many other communities in California did do, right? We have ample green space. We have our green belts. We have our bike paths. And that is a wonderful thing. And the con to it is that because we did not grow, we have also continued to leave people out. So let's go to the next slide, if you could, please. Of all the housing units in Davis, the top reflects Davis, 56% are single-family homes, and most of them were built after 1980, all right? On the right-hand side there, you see that 30% are multiplexes, the apartment buildings that are of higher density within our city. 12% represent condos, townhomes, etc. Ooh, I better hurry up. My time's running out. That bottom side, so sorry, could you go back real quick, Barbara? Don't worry, we got it. Go back one more time. There's missing middle housing. That bottom picture is what's very popular from the book Missing Middle Housing and has gained popularity with urban planners around the country to indicate a variety of dwellings and residential configurations that match a variety of stages of life and socioeconomic levels that reflect a true diversity of a community. And that is what we are missing right now. If you could please go ahead. We think of ourselves as an affluent community, and it's true. There is significant affluence here in Davis. However, that top number might surprise you. Based on the census data, we are at 27% poverty. You might say in your mind quickly, well, that's because of students. Students are focused on their studies, they're not earning an income. It's bringing that number up. However, when you look at the number at the top there, and perhaps for those of you in the back that can't read it, it shows that for children under 18 years old, we're at 20% poverty. The average poverty percentage for the state of California is 12.2%. Are we as affluent as we say we are? Please, if you could go to the next slide. Here's more evidence of that. This is from our housing element. Thank you, City of Davis, for completing our housing element. This graphic shows what overpayment by homeowners looks like across the neighborhoods in Davis. If you live in Davis, take a moment and find your address on the screen. Now, if you look at it, this means the federal definition of being overburdened in your house payments is that you're paying 30% or more. That's the threshold, 30%. What this graphic indicates is that there is not a single neighborhood in Davis where people are not struggling to pay their mortgage. Varying degrees, yes. Some people are doing well, yes. But with every single neighborhood, we have struggle. Please go to the next slide. 55% of our city are renters, okay? Of our renters, the situation is far more dire. The scale here has changed where we have it, where the yellow has moved to 20 to 40%, okay? The previous slide was 10%. That means that if you were to choose any street in Davis, close your eyes, open them again, and pick an address, chances are the people that you are looking at, the kitchen table that they are sitting at, is one that's struggling to pay for food because they are overburdened in their housing payments. And I'll say this point more clearly. We know it's more than 30% based on this graphic. We don't know if it's 75%. We don't know if it's 50%. But we know it's too high. Please, next one. Yet housing prices continue to rise and vacancy rates stay low. Okay? There is a combination effect here. Part of the American Dream subdivision planning model that Davis is a part of also includes the fact that we rely on land value and house appreciation as part of our fortune. Having an address that you own, having an address where you rent, dictates your fortunes in different ways. And I'm using the term fortune in two different meanings. Our literal fortune, as in our retirement. I'm going to sell this house and it's going to take care of me. And it also means our fortune in terms of our opportunities for work, our opportunities for school, the friends that you make, the friends that you meet, how far away the grocery store is, and what kind of food they sell there. In my career before I shifted to housing, I worked in education. And in that time, the lessons of inequity in society as it shows up by zip code was all too real to me every day. And that's why I shifted to housing. It's because this reality is what's shaping the lives of children, families, and seniors, not just in California, but nationwide. But it is uniquely concentrated here. If you could, please move to the next. It impacts everyone. Tonight, we have in fact been talking about those that are the most vulnerable, But I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that if our neighbor isn't doing well, it means our community isn't doing well, right? This affects seniors, even those who might be in a 4-bedroom house and might be, from all respects, seeming to do quite well, but may not be able to pay for their groceries, right? It absolutely affects children, as we already discussed, and we also know that it affects our workforce. 57.9% of UC Davis employees live outside of Davis, and one of the top reasons that's cited for that is affordability, right? There are other colleagues here that are going to be talking about the experiences of students, so I won't go into detail there, but we know that they are also experiencing higher rates of housing insecurity. If you could, please. The good news is, at events like tonight, what we're searching for is a way to shift that paradigm, to think about this in a new way. Local action, local partnerships, and local solutions work together to find our way out of what this seems to be a box that we're in right now. The Housing Trust Fund, which we're going to be discussing in detail tonight, is one of those examples of public investment, a reflection of our values as a community, being used as a lever away from for-profit only development. I'm not saying for-profit only development will go away. No. It's expanding the marketplace to include nonprofit and public-oriented development. So I'm very excited to learn from my colleagues on the right of me here and from all of you in the room on how we can make this shift towards funding our Housing Trust Fund in a way that gives us another path forward. And with that, I will leave you. Thank you so much for the time. My name's Judy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy. Our next speaker does not need much introduction. Bill Pride has been a staple in this community for decades. He is now the executive director of YOLO Community Builders, unsheltered and transitional housing. It's his new endeavor. I think when Bill Pride said he was going to retire, we all knew that Bill Pride was not going to retire. And this is his new venture, and it's an honor to have you here tonight. Bill, welcome.
Thank you and good evening. I'm Bill Pride, Executive Director of YOLO Community Builders, formerly of Davis Community Meals and Housing. I just wanted to follow up on something that Roberto said, because I know he mentioned having all you folks here in support of building affordable housing and having some more way to kind of communicate about the housing needs in the city of Davis. And I was just going to mention that, years ago when I first started at Davis Community Meals, I was invited to a meeting at the City of Davis, with the City of Davis City Hall, by Geraldine Cochran, who was the Social Services Director back then. And the issue was developing 2 pieces of property in the City of Davis, one called Tremont Green, which is now owned by Mutual Housing, and also Moore Village, where now Wild Horse was just being developed at that point in time. And frankly, when I walked into that room at City Hall, I was there with Geraldine, there was somebody else with me from the nonprofit community, and there was this many people in that City Hall opposed to developing those properties. So I think there's been a huge change in how people in the community are looking at what's needed in the community and how to address those needs. And I do want to thank everybody for coming out this evening and talking about that. In my years at Davis Community Meals and Housing, when I first started there, we were a smaller organization that had a transitional housing program and other programs dealing with homeless and unhoused folks in the city of Davis through a meals program, transitional housing, a day shelter resource center. And the first issue I kind of noticed when I first started was, we have a transitional housing program where our goal is to move folks from being unhoused to being housed again. And at the time, back in the early 2000s, the vacancy rate in the city of Davis was low, 2, 3, 4%, 5%. And of course, even back then, the cost of housing here was too expensive for most folks to move from being unhoused to being housed again. And so I got involved with some folks, some wonderful folks, some of them in the room here tonight, Luke Watkins, Shoshana Zatz from Neighborhood Partners, and we embarked on a journey to build a place called Cesar Chavez Plaza. And later we embarked on doing Creekside over in East Davis. And more recently, DCM got involved in doing Paul's Place, where we replaced an existing building with a new building, including 18 permanent supportive housing units. And they were all kind of steps forward in a way to, I thought, to address the issue of building more housing to house the unhoused in a very direct fashion. Because frankly, I mean, right now, as of this day on Zillow, when I looked this morning, the average cost for a one-bedroom in the city of Davis is $1,900. And the average income you need to have to qualify to pay that rent is $5,000 a month, which is totally out of the reach of anybody that we deal with who is unhoused in the city of Davis. And I think compounded by that is also just another fact, was that back in 2017, when we started having conversations with the city of Davis and other interested community members to replace what was then 1111 8th Street with what became Paul's Place, there's 131,000 homeless people in the state of California. And by 2023, when we finished the building, 7 years later, there's now 181,000 homeless people in the state of California, an increase of 50,000 in that 7-year period. Frankly, Paul's Place built 18 units of permanent supportive housing, which is not even the number of folks becoming unhoused every day during that 7-year period. To actually address that number of homeless folks in that same period of time, you'd have to build 2,800 Paul's places to actually house all those folks who became unhoused during that 7 years, which is a startling statistic, frankly. I mean, I know the Reverend mentioned seeing homeless folks in tents along West Capitol Avenue. I mean, anybody who goes through Midtown in Sacramento sees that everywhere. I mean, that's the result of what's happened when the pace of developing the housing has not kept pace with the needs out there, and has certainly not kept pace with the affordability. I mean, so that's become a critical issue in our state, frankly. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what I see as some of the unique challenges of housing the unhoused. First off, of course, is that, you're trying to house folks who have little or no income. I mean, generally, the best scenario, even when some folks have income, it's usually not more than $1,000, $1,500 a month, tops probably. If most folks have any income, it's mostly SSI, which is a fixed income for folks on some disability maybe, or some kind of SSDI payment, and that ranges from $850 to $1,150 a month. There is absolutely no place in Davis they can afford that unless you go to some place that rents to extremely low income folks. And of course, the other thing that happens too, which is kind of a big challenge for everybody in the field, is most, if not many, have mental health issues, substance abuse issues, that you have to figure out a way to kind of house these folks with those issues and make it work for everybody else in the community. I mean, it's not an easy task. And I'm not sure where Cinda went to, but if anybody has questions, Cinda, who works for DCM, and she's been a supportive services coordinator for us for many years, she knows full well the challenges, and I invite you to go talk to her at the end of the proceedings tonight. The other thing too is that, chronically homeless folks, many of them have been homeless for many years. It's actually a huge challenge to move from the streets to being housed again. I mean, just the shock of going from being in the great outdoors 24/7 for many years and being suddenly inside with 4 walls is a big challenge mentally for most folks to adjust to. I know last year somebody moved into Paul's Place while I was still employed there. She left within a month because she couldn't deal with the 4 walls. It just she wasn't able to kind of get her life wrapped around being inside again. And of course, there are a lot of basic barriers, and it's not just including Paul's Place, but just including any rental housing, which is that people have evictions. Many of our folks have past criminal convictions, including drug convictions. And those are huge challenges if you're getting federal money, because they generally don't allow you to rent to those folks. Some folks have an amount of bad debt. I mean, that's something that some of these folks had before. They owe PG&E, they owe credit cards, they became homeless, they haven't been paid in many years. But because of that debt and the regulations that are in many affordable housing communities, they cannot rent to them. Because of their income, they have no way to pay a security deposit or their first month's rent. Sometimes it's just getting basic information. I mean, having, you need a driver's license, ID card, birth certificate, other forms of ID. to actually be able to be renters in many places nowadays. Pets is a big issue. I know there's been some state legislation passed in the last few years that under some programs that the state funds for building affordable housing, they have to rent to homeless individuals who have pets without any kind of special qualifications. But that's generally not the rule other places. So folks with pets sometimes have issues about moving inside if they have a dog or a cat or some other pet. And of course, I think one of the big issues too, which it seems kind of odd, is there's people out there who've been homeless for the last 20, 30, 40 years. They actually don't have any ID anywhere. You can actually go and try to get a credit report, and they don't exist anywhere, frankly, because they've been off the grid so many years. And that can create its own challenges, frankly. So what is needed to kind of respond to those challenges? I mean, clearly the need for the more housing is just huge. I mean, it's frankly a daunting task. I mean, if I sat here and figured out to build how many of those 2,800 Paul's Places units just to house those 50,000 folks over the last 7 years, you're talking well into the $1 trillion to build all those housing units. And so it's really daunting to figure out how you're going to kind of do that. And of course, some folks, I mean, I know over the years, I've been dealing with HUD and all the other kind of regulations that I had to deal with at DCMH over the years. You have funding requirements, you have to do this, you have to do that. One of the things that came out some years ago is something called Housing First, which was the idea that instead of having folks do something interim, like making them go into transitional housing or some other kind of program, that you're supposed to move folks directly from the streets into the housing and then have them accept those services afterwards, on the idea that getting them into housing was some kind of thing that you could kind of make sure they get through and then get them the services they need to make sure they stay housed. And I would just say this much, that that's easier said than done. I mean, there are a lot of folks in the streets, Davis and other cities, whose mental health problems are extremely severe. I mean, putting them into housing was not a great answer for them, frankly. I mean, a lot of them need to be in some kind of board and care facility, maybe some hospitalization for a period of time, some other kind of avenue to help them move along in their journey to become housed all over again. And clearly there needs to be more money put into helping folks support themselves, whether it's with vouchers, project-based vouchers, some kind of support services through some state funding or local funding. But I mean, even if you moved into like Cesar Chavez Plaza right now, I think the cheapest rent there is probably around $375, $400 a month, which is extremely inexpensive compared to everything else in the city of Davis. But you have to have some income to qualify to do that, and you have to have some people moving in able to pay that. And of course, we still have folks in the streets that have no income. So there has to be some kind of designated income stream to help folks move from being unhoused to being housed again. And of course, I think that the one thing I think anybody who's ever heard me talk before is that really having a good supportive services on site for the folks who live there is very key to actually helping them move in and also stay there and be stable and safe. I mean, most folks, like I said, move in, they haven't been inside for many years. They have many needs that somehow are not being met, and they don't know how to meet those themselves. And having somebody there to help them kind of deal with all those daily issues is key to helping them get the services they need to actually just stay there. And whether it's as simple as making sure that, I know in some of our communities, DCM's communities in Davis, we had staked to make food deliveries once a week. So people could come down and help them get food so they had something to eat. But those are just some basic things that a supportive services coordinator can provide to folks. But it's vitally needed to make sure these communities work. And why do we need to do more? In my mind at least, all unhoused individuals need to be treated with dignity and respect, just like every other community member. As I've said many times over the years in my speeches to groups, whether it's Rotary, Kiwanis, other groups around, frankly, everybody in this room probably knows somebody in their family who's had mental health problems, substance abuse issues, and dealt with those things at one or more periods of time. Many times the folks who are on the streets, of course, are somebody's brother, their sisters, their moms, their dads, their sons, their daughters. They are us. And we need to care for us. That is how the community should work. It's a healthy way to kind of deal with the homeless issue. It's a healthy way for us to respond to what their needs are. And by doing that, we create a more stable community, a safer community, and all of our community benefits from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, and I appreciate you touching on, we've heard a lot tonight, and we focused a lot about getting people into housing, and one of the issues that Dana and her team has worked on, and we've talked about is around evictions, right? And we get folks into housing, and then what type of housing support services or housing stabilization services are there so that when people are moved into housing, it's a successful placement. And I think that's an important piece of this conversation as well as we continue to move forward. Next up, Rob Davis. Rob is the former mayor of the city of Davis and is the director of UC Davis Agus Compass. Welcome, Rob.
Go to the next slide. So, undergraduate experience survey from 2022 found that approximately 2,400 students said they had been in a state of houselessness at one point during the year. Couch surfing, sleeping in cars, some of these overlap. Many students couch surf. Now, this is a transient kind of situation. There are very few students that stay for long periods in these states. And so the next slide tries to delve in, and I've been working on trying to figure out a picture for this for a while, but rather than unhoused, chronically unhoused situations, most students find themselves in a vulnerability sort of continuum. And I've been trying to picture exactly what's going on, and this diagram illustrates some different categories. Many students are chronically vulnerable, like what Judy was talking about in terms of paying rent. There are many students who are trying to figure it out month to month. And you can see that students in those situations do at times then move into being unhoused but sheltered in some way. So they're unhoused, they don't have a permanent place anymore, but they're couch surfing. They're sleeping in their car. Good example of a chronically vulnerable student is the guy who was in my office today. He's a transfer student, very vulnerable population. He's first gen, also very vulnerable. Lives out of town, commutes in, has 2 side hustles to pay the bills. His side hustles require a car, as does his commute, and his car broke down. His $800 bill, it's going to possibly put him out of housing. Right. The acutely vulnerable, another category that we see this spring, 4 students showed up in our office and said they have mold in their house and in their apartment, they have to move out immediately. They have no place to go. They're all from Southern California. Can't go home. They're in the middle of their quarter. Over on the left, unhoused but sheltered, those are students whose hustle is actually to couch surf throughout the entire time they're at UC Davis, possibly sleep in their car. So a good example of this is a student who was doing that successfully for 3 years and then got joint custody of his daughter and did not want to couch surf anymore. Didn't feel he could couch surf with his daughter anymore and do it safely. The ones at the top is a category I came up with. It doesn't exist in any HUD definition. Transiently unhoused but sheltered. These are what we call the long commuters. Transfer student from Fresno who was in her last quarter, returning student, was driving up from Fresno, 2 kids in Fresno, driving up from Fresno every week, sleeping in her car for 3 nights, and then driving back home. And then it got cold, and it got dark, and then she was scared. It took her a month to find the courage to come and seek help. Now, those are just vignettes. I think the number of students who are truly unhoused and unsheltered is very small, thankfully. But we have these categories of students. Another chronically vulnerable is a student who delivers pizza in our town, and then her car broke down, and so her means of income is gone. Others face insurance costs, or their parents get sick. I had a student who's sleeping in a closet. He's lucky to be paying only $500. He says, I can't keep sleeping in a closet, and he just admits to me that he's sending a lot of his financial aid home to his mom, who's been sick. This is the reality. And this goes beyond the 2,400 who experience some level of houselessness during the year. The last slide I want to show is what we're doing about it. Last slide. that I have is just a few of the things we're doing. We've master leased, that is Aggie Compass, Basic Needs Center on campus under Student Affairs. We've master leased 6 beds at Orchard Park. The mold victims were moved into Orchard Park into interim housing so that they had a place to stay for the month while the remediation took place. This summer we'll probably house 30 or 40 students who face gaps in their leases in conference housing. Our college-focused rapid rehousing program is for students who have additional wraparound needs. Bill talked about substance use disorders. Bill talked about folks who have untreated mental health. That happens among students as well. And so we have 21 beds at Orchard Park where we can put students for intensive wraparound services so that they can succeed in their education and have housing. We'll give close to $400,000 in rental support grants. These are emergency grants. Just gave one today to an international student who found himself unable to buy groceries, and we covered a couple months of his rent. So we'll give $400,000 in those. Aggie House, which is a registered student organization, it just received an honor from the city, the Hunt Award. We support them so that they can house a true shelter environment over at the Belfry just off campus. And then last, you may not have heard about it, maybe you hadn't heard of any of these, but last is that there is an ongoing, essentially a voucher program run out of Orchard Park, Primera Grove, and the Green. Those are on-campus housing that provides 563 students with monthly $100, $200, or $300 rental supports. Now, there's a lot of issues around why students find themselves in this situation. Most of these students that come to us have what you would consider generous financial packages. The complexity of how students convert financial support into actual living is where the rub really is. And I'd be happy to answer your questions about that when the time comes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. Our next speaker is, or group, and a speaker, I should say, Un Cafecito. And we're going to welcome Jimena Diaz-Jackson up for a brief introduction for audio stories from low-income parents of students in Davis. Welcome, Jimena.
Good evening. I'm Jimena Diaz-Jackson, Davis Young Unified School District Coordinator of Language Justice and Family Partnership. With UC Davis Professor Natalia Deep Sosa, we are facilitators of Un Cafecito. Thank you. Un Cafecito is a DJUSD leadership project in partnership with Davis Phoenix Coalition and funded by Yolo County ARP mini grants. It is a bi-weekly Spanish virtual encounter for 10 Latina mothers, señoras. Un Cafecito shares resources available at the schools, the city, and the county, and invites guest speakers to talk about issues of interest of the señoras. Thank you. With Professor Deep Sosa, we surveyed the señoras about housing in Davis. These are their answers. Señoras profile. They have lived in Davis from 4 to 26 years. All are parents of Davis school children. They live in families of 3 to 7 people. Most live in low-income apartments and pay between $1,000 and almost $2,000 monthly for rent, which is 50 to 70% of their income. They are employed in Davis in a bakery as a waitress, kitchen help, cook, housekeeping. Now you will hear their voices. We were having some technical issues earlier, so just wait a second. You can start reading the slide. You will hear their voices in Spanish, and the translations are available for you in English in the slide.
Que es injusto porque cuando estás aplicando necesitas tener un salario muy mínimo y no se me hace justo porque con el mínimo que piden no podemos sobrevivir. Si ganamos muy mínimo, solo igual nos alcanzaría nomás para la renta y no nos alcanzaría para nada más. Entonces es lo que veo un poco injusto, que no podemos rentar un apartamento de bajo ingreso porque cuando estás iniciando la aplicación necesitas tener un ingreso mínimo.
Pues me he fijado que piden depósito alto, para mí es alto, y otra parte que también te piden como que tengas varios o buen récord en tu crédito, cosa que también a mí se me dificulta, no tengo, y uno de los requisitos es tener buen crédito, o conocer a alguien que responda por ti también para aplicar. Tener personas que te apoyen en eso también es difícil. Bueno, a mí se me hace difícil juntar lo que voy a pagar y todavía el dar el depósito es mucha cantidad por fuerza el depósito. Y en la mayor parte no te lo regresan. Es como dinero perdido. Nunca te lo regresan.
Quizás el proceso para poder aplicar a un apartamento de bajos ingresos, no sé qué se basan para saber si aplico o no aplico, porque me han rechazado 3 veces. Según ellos, me excedo un poquito de lo que ellos piden que gane.
Y lo que no me gusta para aplicar en esos apartamentos es que piden muchos requisitos. Y si te piden, toman el ingreso total de tu cheque cuando no es lo que recibes tú. Otra, que te califiques o no califiques, te cobran la aplicación y ya es dinero perdido que ya no te regresan. Y otra más es que si tiene un límite, si haces menos de 25 no calificas. Pero si haces más de 60 tampoco calificas. Eso es lo que a mí lo que se me hace injusto.
Años atrás sí, pasé una situación así, que rentamos una casa y le pedimos al señor que arreglara los detalles que tenía la casa y él no quiso arreglarnos, dijo que nosotros teníamos que pagar eso porque nosotros éramos los que vivíamos ahí. Entonces, o si no, pues sí nos iba a subir la renta por arreglarnos el lugar. Fue la excusa que nos dio. Nunca nos arregló nada.
Pero sí algo como un tipo de chantaje, porque si yo pido como que arreglen algo del departamento o decir que está mal, dicen que pueden hacerlo, pero tienen que subir la renta o nada más van a buscar como un arreglo pero leve, sin que tenga que invertir gastos al dueño.
Pues hasta ahorita no he tenido problemas. Tratamos de dar ese pago aunque nos recortemos con otras cosas que necesitemos. Digamos en comida, quizás alguna ropa que ocupen mis hijos, pues tendremos que esperar un poco para poder completarlo.
¿Por qué? Porque en primer lugar la manager es extremadamente exigente y también podemos ver que es un poco racista. Y también hemos recibido amenazas de desalojo por parte de ella por cualquier cosita mínima que hagamos.
Sí, porque a veces se me hace difícil reunir la renta total porque a veces como cambia la temporada de las horas en el trabajo, te quitan días o te mandan más temprano a tu casa, depende si está muy despacio, y pues no te llega el cheque igual como tú lo esperas, entonces hay un desbalance en tus cuentas y pues sí te cuesta juntar, a mí me cuesta mucho. Y pues lógico, si no tienes para tu renta, luego dices, si no pago me van a desalojar, porque no te dice, no, pues te esperamos entonces, no. Entonces, sí.
Por el momento no, pero porque sé que mi ingreso no es sobre el límite de lo que ellos requieren, por ese momento creo que bien, pero obviamente si mi ingreso es alto, obviamente tengo que preocuparme en buscar algo más, que para entonces se haría un poco más difícil, porque al subir unos cuantos dólares, que no es mucho, que podría ser 10, 20 dólares más, que eso lo toman en cuenta, eso ya sube para pagar el renta, o sea, para que me incrementen la renta, pero no me alcanza para cubrir completamente todo. Es un poquito medio, ¿cómo se dice? Como siempre digo yo, el relleno del sándwich, ni para arriba ni para abajo. Y miedo a ser como desalojado por el departamento. En el departamento es un poco de miedo, porque no sabemos que no estamos bien aquí, y porque el departamento está demasiado no condición para a la vez vivir, porque son departamentos muy viejos, exageradamente viejos, y entonces si uno pide que los arreglen, claro, yo creo que tendrían que renovar mucho renovar. Entonces sí hay un poco de miedo al pedir eso, y pedir el miedo de que te desalojen, ¿verdad? Porque ya lo intentamos una vez y nos dijeron que nos rentaban otra propiedad, pero equivalía a $400 más caro, entonces es algo que nosotros ya no lo podíamos pagar. Entonces mejor nos decidimos quedar en el mismo, y así está, pues así nos quedamos. Claro que pertenezco al condado de Yolo, con la diferencia es que como migrante a veces no tenemos los mismos derechos, pero aún así no estamos solos. Hay unas organizaciones que siempre están para ayudar a la comunidad hispana y la comunidad inmigrante.
No siento que pertenezco al condado con los mismos derechos y oportunidades. Posiblemente falta de educación y comunicación por no tener el lenguaje de inglés.
En verdad no siento que pertenezco al condado. Cada semana me encuentro con interacciones racistas, xenofóbicas, clasistas y personas que tratan de hacerme sentir menos. Yo tengo mucha resiliencia y fuerza, pero a veces me canso y no quiero salir de mi casa porque no tengo la energía de entretener interacciones de este tipo. Yo he encontrado comunidad dentro de organizaciones y amigos en Davis que son verdaderamente inclusivas. La verdad, la mayoría de las veces me he sentido excluida, puesto que yo soy como un relleno de sándwich, porque mi economía no es tan baja para poder tener las ayudas que se ofrecen, ni tan alta para poder cubrir todas mis necesidades sin problemas.
Thank you. And thank you to all the señoras that are here tonight with us. I will also want to thank to the organizers for providing interpretation services. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jimena, and thank you, Un Cafecito, for your work and for relaying to us your experiences. Many of them stood out to me, but the one that stood out the most was, we had to cut food and clothing for our children to pay rent. And I think, as a father of two young boys, that one hits home pretty hard. So thank you for bringing that to us here this evening. Our next speaker, Georgina Valencia. Georgina Valencia is an affordable housing consultant. First day I met Georgina, I think the first question she asked me was, how do we get more affordable housing in Davis and how can I help? And it's been nonstop since then, and we really appreciate all your work, and welcome.
Wow, I've learned a lot tonight. Lot to take in, and I really appreciate all my fellow speakers here tonight. So if you could put up my first slide. It's that housing continuum that Dana Bailey already mentioned, and I'm going to focus on where the point of the arrow is, because that's really my background and expertise, and that is affordable home ownership and first-time home buyers. So if you'll move to the second slide, please, that's kind of the meat of my whole conversation. So I'm going to give you a very personal story. In 1981, I was a 20-something-year-old here in town looking to try and buy my first home. I was working at the university at that time, and you can see by the salaries there, you're actually going to see how much I made in 1981. So, and I've also got, so let me give you the categories. I'm doing every decade there. I won't talk about each decade, but 1981, the property I'm talking about is an affordable project that is at 2300 Sycamore Lane. It was roughly 25 units. They were townhomes, so they're attached. 1,000 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, and a quaint little tiny backyard. That was an affordable home in 1981 in Davis, and it was $50,000. Doesn't that sound good? So the salaries there that you'll see in 1981 at the university, beginning level administrative assistant, which I was at that time, was making roughly $18,000 a year. I'm going to round these numbers off to make it easy for me. And also teachers. So a beginning level teacher in 1981 was making about $17,000 a year. And so what you see there is at $50,000, it was about 2.5 times what somebody was making. All right, let's jump down to 2023. These same properties, they're resale properties, you know. So in 2023, now the property is at $460,000. But what's really illuminating is look at the incomes. The income for that same starting level staff person, administrative assistant at UC Davis is just under $42,000 a year. And for a teacher, it's just under $47,000 a year. So now you're talking about almost more than 9 times that starting income. How does that person buy that home? Okay, that's part of the problem. So let's break it down just a little bit more. I'm going to give you a definition of what's a first-time home buyer. Who are the people? What's the demographic of the folks that are trying to get into Davis and buy this first home? Okay, so I want to stop and kind of illuminate, I'll say one, a little bit of an idea here, and that is many of you may have read Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law. And it's important, I think, to note here, I think it was mentioned earlier, but it's important to note that, you know, if you were a person of color post-World War II, you didn't get much opportunity to buy a house. In fact, you got no opportunity. You couldn't get an FHA loan. You couldn't get conventional loans. Builders wouldn't sell you a house. So what that means as a person of color is you couldn't get into the market to earn some of that what's called generational wealth. That's what's important. That's what's left a lot of people of color behind and propelled those of us that have had the opportunity to buy. So first-time home buyers, that's one group, okay? They haven't had that opportunity. The other folks that I'll describe are our service workers. We've heard about them already in Cafecito, some of the folks that we're talking about. So not only is it restaurant workers and, maybe the person that's helping you at Nugget Market. These are all people, university workers. These are all people that are commuting into our town because they can't afford to live here. Okay, if I've got a problem, I always try and find a solution. So the solution that I'm offering up is down payment assistance. And it's actually a proven a proven, I'll say, method for helping first-time home buyers actually purchase a home. There's all kinds of programs out there in various cities, but our city doesn't have a program like that. We don't have a mechanism to try and help these young first-time home buyers, people of color, service industry. We don't have any mechanism to help them buy a home. My mouth's getting dry, sorry. How do we help them then? Well, I'll share with you, you may have read in the last 2 years, the state of California actually did a program that was called Dream for All. And Dream for All was a down payment assistance program. I see some smiles in the audience. They may be associated with this program. Thank you. That'll help a little bit. Last year, the state allocated $330 million. That allocation of money for down payment assistance was scooped up in 11 days. I mean, think about that, 11 days. That tells you the level of need out there for people that need some help, need that down payment assistance just so they can cut a break and get in and buy a home. This year, I think it was $220,000. I don't know what the status of that program is right now, but it was a real help. I had some clients, honestly, that, and I like Rob's comment about side hustles, that we're working 3 jobs to try and buy a home. We weren't able to get them in a home in Davis, but with that Dream for All program, we did find them a great home. One was in West Sacramento, and another one was in South Natomas. So down payment assistance. How much money am I talking about? Well, actually $20,000. That's not a lot of money. What would $20,000 do? Well, if you go back to that house that I mentioned last year, 2023, $460,000, all you need is 3 to 3.5% down. Well, 3% of $460,000 is $13,800. There's the down payment, okay? The next piece is, oh gosh, there's money left over in that $20,000 to pay for closing costs. And there might even be a little bit of money to buy an interest rate down. So $20,000 can change somebody's life, can get them into the game. What if we said, okay, that sounds great, Georgina, let's do that. But or why would we? How's that? Why would we want to have down payment assistance? Why would we want to help these people? Well, we've been hearing it. You don't have a vibrant community without everybody being involved. We've got all of these demographics of folks commuting into this town. And there's one, that I'll add in too, and that is our schools don't have enough students. So we've got now what's called, I'll call a commuter student. So families can't afford to live here in Davis, so they're in West Sacramento or Woodland. I know I contributed that with my clients, but they're in other communities. Their kids are registered here and going to school here. Parents come in to do their job, drop the kids off at the school, and then they pick the kids up at the end of the day, head off to their respective communities. Well, that's wage leak, okay? The wages those people are earning in this town, we're losing that. You know what else we're losing? We're losing those kids. Those kids are getting educated here, but we're losing them from our community, as well as those families. That's a real loss for us. So what would be maybe some benefits for us? Well, keeping those kids here. Another statistic I'll give you, nearly 58% of our homes are rental properties. And as the university continues to grow, I'm not here to dispute the university. They're a major employer in this community, and I support them. I worked there at one time. I already told you that. But as they continue to grow, there's going to continue to be pressure on housing in this community, and they're going to continue to be more and more rental housing. If we had something like a down payment assistance program, we could help to shift that dynamic and get people into houses as opposed to landlords creating another rental for themselves. So, okay, I need to kind of bring this to an end here. How do we fund down payment assistance? I would submit to you that we would fund it through a housing trust fund. We have a housing trust fund in our city. There is money going into it. I would say that there's not enough money going in to support a program like this, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't find funding sources with the help of our community to fund that trust fund. We would also have to create a program But if we can find the money and create the program, I think we can really make a difference for people. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Georgina. And you introduced our next two speakers well. They're going to touch on exactly what you just brought up. It is an honor for me to work with every day the next two speakers. Our next speaker is Kelly Stackowitz, who is the Assistant City Manager for the City of Davis, and she is up next and is going to talk about current status of some funding for the city. Welcome, Kelly.
So Georgina set this up really well. The city has something called an Affordable Housing Fund. She called it a Housing Trust Fund, same idea. The City of Davis, we're going to have a little bit of a government accounting lesson here. It's be super fun and exciting, but has different buckets. And those different buckets we put money into. And the different buckets have different requirements. Some are very fungible. So our general fund is money that we can use for any kind of governmental purpose of what the city does. So fire, police, we could use it for housing. It can be used very widely. We have other funds that are very, very specific. For example, our wastewater fund. It's only funded by rates, and those rates have to go to pay for that utility. It cannot be used for anything else. So if we had extra money in our wastewater fund, we couldn't just transfer it over and use it for affordable housing or any other purpose. In the middle, we have a whole bunch of other kinds of funds that we can use for different types of purposes. One of those is our Affordable Housing Fund. This was originally set up when the city had something called redevelopment. And at that point in time, there was something called a set-aside, a housing set-aside. So money that came to the city from our redevelopment agency, our redevelopment area, we were required to put 20% of it into this housing set-aside. So at its height, that meant that this fund, which had to be used for affordable housing, was getting up to $2 million a year. That ended in 2012 when the state discontinued redevelopment agencies. And since that time, so for the past decade plus, we've been trying to figure out how do we get a source of funding that is ongoing and sustainable like that housing set aside. We don't have the answer yet, so still working on that. How much is in our fund right now? So we've continued the fund. We have it. It's the money that goes into it, we still only use for all of the things along the spectrum that you've been hearing about this evening. So it could be anything from funding that goes toward homelessness activities or services or shelter, all the way up to funding that is for ownership housing for affordable levels. We have about $600,000 that's not connected to anything right now. It's able to be spent, but that's it. Where do we get these dollars? Where do they come from? So this is can you go to the next slide, please? Oh, actually, let me answer the last question that's on that slide. Is there another fund outside of the city organization? I would be remiss if I didn't mention that due to the leadership of Georgina and a number of other folks in this room, about a year ago, the city was able to set up a fund through the Sacramento Regional Community Foundation that is a City of Davis Affordable Housing Fund, and put some seed money into it, so about $10,000, not a lot, but it was matched with private contributions exceeding $5,000. And that is a way that individuals in the community, if they don't want to write a check to the City of Davis, because that generally doesn't make anybody super happy and excited, you could actually submit provide a donation to the foundation. It will go in this affordable housing fund that the foundation holds on to. At some time in the future, when the city has a specific project or specific need for the dollars to be used for affordable housing, we can draw on those dollars and use them for that particular purpose. Okay, now the next slide. This is the very short list of where revenue comes from for that fund right now. So I'm going to translate what some of these things mean. The gamut rent. The city happens to own about 20 single-family homes that are used for affordable single-family home rentals. Because the city owns the homes outright, we don't have carrying costs on them, and we're able to use, or the majority of the rent that comes in from those homes, we're able to put into the Affordable Housing Fund and use to seed the fund. It's not $2 million a year. It's about $150,000 a year, give or take. So that's one source. Another source is in lieu fees. So when we have a project that comes to the city, sometimes the council agrees to, the developer proposes and the council agrees to allowing for in lieu fees. So instead of building a particular unit that's an affordable unit, the developer will pay in lieu fees. That is a feast or famine. If you've got a project coming in, that the fund might get the in lieu fees. But if you don't have any projects, then you don't get any in lieu fees. And either way, you don't get any units. So it's a mixed bag. It's an option and it's a toolbox, a tool in our toolbox, but doesn't create a unit. The 1% fee from the sale of affordable homes. So Dana mentioned earlier that we do have, when I say we, the city doesn't own them, they're privately owned, but they have covenants and restrictions on them. So these affordable units, when they're sold, the city works to bring a buyer to the seller. And if the city does that within a certain time frame, then the city gets 1% of the fee, somewhat like a real estate agent would get. Again, those are, we sell or we are involved in a handful of sales a year. So that's not going to amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars, but $20,000 a year maybe, so it's something. And then I put in the bullet here for the Celeste. That is a new apartment complex, an all-market complex in South Davis. And the council approved a new kind of scenario for us, an ongoing source of revenue for affordable housing. The project, once it is fully occupied and kind of has been in place for a year, which it's now about that time, a percentage of the rent will be provided to the city every year as a payment in lieu of the actual units. So they don't have any affordable units. That's the downside. But the upside is we'll have this ongoing contribution to the Affordable Housing Fund, and it will be a minimum of $100,000 a year. So we're curious to see how that's going to work. It hasn't started yet, but that is a legal agreement that the developers engaged in with the city. So that's where we get the funding. It's not a lot, and we're still trying to look for additional options. So how do we use the funding? You've heard from several of the speakers this evening different ways that we use the funding, and it really is along a continuum, and it really is up to the city and the community to decide what our priorities are. There are needs, many more needs than there are dollars, and I don't think that's ever going to change. So we're going to have to decide, do we want to spend more on homelessness services? Do we want to do down payment assistance programs? Do we want to do permanent supportive housing? Are we interested in tenant-based rental assistance? Do we want to provide funding to affordable developers like mutual housing to build new construction? What is our priority? What are our policy objectives? Not an easy question, and definitely not an easy answer. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I'll finish up. I put this slide on here because I did just want to show that we have tried really hard in Davis to spread our affordable housing across all parts of the community. So this is a slightly old map. It doesn't have a couple of our newer projects on it, but there isn't one part of the community that has all the affordable housing and another part that has none. We really have tried to make sure that affordable housing is integrated into the neighborhoods and is part of every portion of town. One of the things that I will mention that's not specific to the affordable housing fund, but is a critical part of making this happen, is the city's inclusionary housing policy. And so that means when a developer comes in with a proposal for a subdivision or some sort of residential project, that we require a portion of that project to be affordable. So right now, the proportion of that, or the percentage of that, is 15% of the units for rental units must be affordable. Otherwise, the other options could be things like the in lieu funds or potentially other scenarios. But because of that, affordable housing is intended to be part of each sub-portion of the community, not located in one particular spot. Next slide. Roberto already commented on this, but it's extremely complicated to put together an affordable housing project. And the city has at its disposal the Affordable Housing Fund. We also use our home funds and our Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG funds. Those are both federal sources of funding. We use those very heavily for affordable housing. Home can be used primarily for new construction. CDBG is often used for rehabilitation or renovation projects. But in addition, there are tax credits and special grants. There's state funding. There's private funding from developer or other locations. And it is a bit of a Tetris puzzle to piece it all together. So we do try to work as we can closely with our affordable housing development partners, such as Mutual, to package together different funding sources. One of the things I do want to mention that I think is important for this community is that most of the federal funding sources that we do have available do not allow funding for traditional students. So if you had, when I say a traditional student, somebody who is single, has no children, goes from high school to university, is low income or doesn't have an income, they are generally not considered or not allowed to be low income in terms of the projects that are funded by federal funding. So we have to use other sources of funding if we're looking at that particular population, which for our community is a large percentage of our population. So I will conclude with that and turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. So quick, couple of housekeeping notes. If you have cards that you wrote a question on, if you can pass them down the aisle or pass them down your aisle to the middle, we will have folks that are here. Looks like Helen's over there. They'll come down the aisle, pick up questions that you have. If you still need a card because you didn't grab one and something inspired you, you have a question you want to write down, Ellen is over here and she can bring you a card. So raise your hand. She'll bring you those. If not, pass your cards to the middle and we'll go from there. With that, we're going to move on to our next speaker. My pleasure. It's my colleague, Vice Mayor Vitiello. Been on the City Council, was elected in 2022, and it's been a pleasure to work with and an honor to work with. And I'm so happy that you're able to be here tonight. And he's going to touch a little bit on the Affordable Housing Fund in ways that it can be supported. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much to Dove and the Interfaith Housing Group for setting this up, and thank you so much to all of you for being here. It's really heartening to see folks who show up for affordable housing are passionate about social equity, and I do think that housing is the social justice issue of our generation here in California. I want to just acknowledge, the raw fact about why we're here, which is because we live in a segregated world, we live in a segregated country, we live in a segregated state, and we live in a segregated county. That's the reality. That's a reality we have to face. But that is a reality that we can change. Now, I was asked to talk about the Housing Trust Fund and the Affordable Housing Fund and what the priorities are to use those dollars and how we can get more dollars. I'm only going to spend a minute on that, sorry. To the organizers, just because so many of our speakers have touched on those topics. and specifically to the point of how difficult it is to build permanent supportive housing and housing for extremely low-income families. We need dollars for that. We need dollars to subsidize nonprofit developers. We need dollars to acquire land on which that kind of housing can get built. Those dollars, as Kelly laid out, there are a few sources, but we need really much higher levels of funding than we're getting right now from our sources. There are several ways to do that. One is to do so through revenue measures. There will likely be a revenue measure on the ballot this fall. It will be likely a general tax, not one specifically towards housing. But I will say that without that revenue measure passing, it will be very difficult to get funds into the Housing Trust Fund, so the Affordable Housing Fund. So please support the revenue measure. Please ask us information about the state of the budget and the fiscal position that we're in and why we need the revenue measure. I had a couple of things that I want to talk about. And they're both controversial. They're both a little spicy, which is good because it's getting late. But I realize I don't have time to talk about both of them. And by the way, I just is the mayor's face nervous right now? No, okay. I love being a kind of a rogue vice mayor. And I will say, while I have the opportunity and the mic, that we have a great mayor right now, a very, very, very good human being who really, really cares about this community. And, there might be issues, disagree with him, or we disagree sometimes, but very honestly, he really, really cares about the people in this community, and I'm honored to serve under his leadership. So thank you, Josh, for who you are, really. The two issues, so I'm going to actually just ask you which one you want to hear about. So the two issues that I'd like to talk about, one is how, I really believe that just the people in this room, if we're unified on an objective, on specific objectives, we can pass any policy that we want. We can solve the housing crisis. I really believe that, an organized group with this much skill in these kind of numbers. But there are tensions within this group. We know that. There are tensions between community groups, city staff, council members, between community organizations. We know that those tensions exist. How do we work together within these tensions? Even if we may not even like each other, some of us might not even like each other, but how do we still work together? How do we come to the table and have a conversation? If we don't resolve our differences, how do we at least talk about them? What are the vehicles through which that might happen? I have a couple of thoughts about that. That's one topic that I'd love to talk about. The other is this other controversial topic about infill and peripheral development. What do we need to do as far as changes in zoning and infill, and how much peripheral development do we need, and what kind of changes, if any, do we need to the process by which we obtain peripheral development? So let me just take a show of hands. You don't have to vote, but who wants to talk about how we work together if we don't like each other? Okay. I know you do, Colin. Who wants to talk about peripheral and infill? Okay, all right. Maybe you and me, we can get a coffee later, Colin. Oh, that's great. Yeah, cool. Great, cool. So on infill, the reality, the hard truth is that we need to densify. Point blank, we need to densify. We cannot be a low-density suburb anymore. If we want to solve the housing crisis, we cannot be a low-density suburb anymore. We need to become a higher-density town. That's the raw fact of the matter. There are plenty of good models for this everywhere, mostly abroad, actually. Places where density doesn't mean overcrowding. What it means is walkable communities. It means bikeable communities. It means places where cars are the resource of last resort. Where there are public spaces where you meet your neighbors, you meet new friends, and where children play safely. That's what density could mean. But it's politically difficult, right? And it's not politically difficult in the abstract, right? Because when you create the dichotomy of peripheral versus infill, I think all of us in the room would prefer to do this through infill, through meet the housing crisis through infill. That's just best practice. That's just planning best practice. The difficulty is, even when you have a receptive city council, The difficulty is when it comes down to the specific parcel level or the project level, there's always somebody that's going to be affected. You know, somebody who moved to Davis because they had a vision of living in a detached single-family home in a low-density block, in a low-density neighborhood, and those voices come out. And I'm not, blaming anybody for having that vision, but those voices come out, and it becomes really politically difficult to pass a project, right? And what I would say in response to that is, when you pay attention to the City Council calendar and when there's any kind of housing project on the docket, please show up. Please participate, because your voice really matters. I can tell you from personal experience that public comment really sways council members in both directions, right? You're sort of determined to pay attention to the fact that who you might be hearing are not representative voices and take sort of community interest into account. And it's really hard not to be swayed by the single voice that's coming at you. So show up, please show up, argue for density, argue for infill, argue for these neighborhoods that we know are best practice. Now, peripheral. So the mayor and I are in a subcommittee where we're trying to explore the potential of how many units we can get through infill. At different densities, at different kinds of rezonings across the city. That work is not done yet, but the sort of picture that's becoming clear is, because even if we upzone the whole city, if we try to create a density overlay that's higher than what we have now, there's still, it's up to private developers to redevelop those parcels into something that's higher density. That's difficult, because it means we're dependent on the pace of redevelopment to attain those housing targets. So we're kind of taking that into stock, trying to figure out at a certain, say, package of zoning reforms, what is the pace of units that will be generated. And the hard truth is we're going to need some peripheral development. Let me say it again. We're going to need some peripheral development if we want to solve the housing crisis before a generation and a half passes. We're going to need some peripheral development. The question is, what kind of peripheral development? And I see some developers in the room here, and they've proposed some projects. And the question is, how are we going to be, as a community and a city, in a strong negotiating position vis-a-vis developers, vis-a-vis all the housing advocates and perhaps no-growth advocates, et cetera, to say, this is the vision that we want for our future? And the two-word answer for that really is general plan. And that's the process we're starting now. So my message on that also is the general plan is going to set the vision for the next generation. It's going to try to think about, within our planning area, in a spatially very explicit sense, what are the parcels that are highest priority for agricultural conservation, for habitat value, for open space, and what are the parcels that we really need to develop with housing that makes sense in the city. What do we want to ask of developers that are offering to develop those parcels in terms of density, in terms of affordable mix or housing mix, in terms of missing middle, in terms of energy, in terms of energy generation on site and storage? Now, again, I'm gonna ask for just a quick audience participation thing. And again, this is a controversial question, so feel free not to raise your hand for any of these answers if you like. But how many people in the room believe that all growth should be infill, even if it slows the pace of how quickly we attain the housing units we need? How many people in the room believe that all of our housing needs should be satisfied through infill alone, the present city boundaries? Okay. How many people, yeah, and you don't have to answer if, you feel like these questions need a little bit more meat on the bone, but how many people feel like, how many of you know about Measure J, by the way? Let me just start there. Okay, great. So how many of you feel that, a housing project that has, say, 50% affordable housing, is net zero, generates all its energy on site, has all the battery storage on site, should, say, has other features, say it's LEED Platinum certified, should be allowed to be built without a vote of the people? How many of you believe that? How about putting it on the ballot and letting people vote? Which it will have to. If we propose that, it will have to go to vote of people. How many people believe that should be the case? That kind of development should be, yeah. Okay, and no way over there. How many people would support a complete repeal of Measure JRD? Yeah. So the point I want to make here is that this is a controversial issue. This is a controversial issue with a lot of difficult conversations that need to be had. And the general plan process is the vehicle by which we have those conversations. So my request to you is to participate, is to show up. We've put commissions now in a lead role in this general plan process. Apply for commissions, be on commissions, participate in the community engagement events that we have. Show up, participate. I'll stop there with infill and peripheral because I think my time is running out, but thank you so much for just showing up tonight and being here. I really appreciate your passion.
All right, thank you, Vice Mayor Vitiello. Appreciate that. So we're running up against some time here. We still are we're gonna get a question in here, and I believe our team is in the back putting together maybe, I don't know how many, one or two that are left for from the audience. So what I'm going to do, when we started this, we talked about very specific things that people that are here tonight, that they can do once we leave here tonight to help further this conversation. So I'm going to turn to each panelist, and here we have folks that are sitting up here that touch on every part of this housing continuum that's been talked about tonight. So in about a minute or less, can you tell people who are sitting here tonight how they can help you in the work that you're doing? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, Reverend Connie, but I think that your enthusiasm can kick it off on the right foot. So I'm going to turn to you and let you start. If you want to go from there or here. Do we have that mic actually?
Yes. The mic right here.
Oh, you got one. Right, you just pass it?
Yeah.
My response is possibly unpopular, and I don't care. I heard the passion on both sides as you were talking about different measures and options. And there were some who were putting up two hands and some that were saying absolutely not. It doesn't matter what the issues are, but my advice to you all to get this done is to come to the table and talk. Sometimes it's not option A or option Z, it's option J, K, or L that works. But we can't get there if we are completely entrenched in our positions.
Thank you, Connie. Yeah.
Support increased density. I know it's unpopular. It is not as scary. It is not as ugly. It is not as dangerous as people fear it might be. And we're here to talk with you about it, and we can show you that.
I guess for our department, since we are serving vulnerable people, it's making sure that the community remembers that all of us are part of the community. Everyone deserves a voice. Everyone deserves to be heard, so we need to make space at the table for everyone to be heard, not just the voices that are here, but from a lot of the voices that we're not hearing from. So I guess that's what I would ask.
I think what I would certainly recommend strongly is just increasing more housing throughout the community. I would just say this much, that in all the time I spent developing Paul's Place and speaking with all the donors and all the folks who went through there and everything else, the biggest comment I got from everybody who went through there is that their sons and daughters could not afford to live in Davis. They could not buy a home here anymore. And these are children who went to good universities, had great jobs. They could not afford to move in the community where they were raised and went to school. And that's certainly a tragedy, frankly. Thank you.
I think from the perspective of the students of UC Davis, I mean, many of you went to university. This is not your university. It's a new university, successfully attracting first-gen, historically underrepresented populations, low-income students. These are our students, and they're going to be contributing to this community for many years. So my plea is, be empathetic towards the reality that many of the students who are here struggle every day to figure out how to pay for their housing. And just be empathetic. Don't write them off. show compassion for them, because they are going to be the leaders of this community and this state going forward, and we need to support them.
So what I would ask for is that people advocate, that you get involved. I mean, it's wonderful that you're here tonight, but it can't stop here. You have to be at city council meetings. You have to be at planning commission meetings. You have to really say, this is what we want. As our assistant city manager, Kelly Stackowitz, said earlier this evening, you know, they're looking for us, staff is looking for us, council's looking for us to give them direction. That's why we've voted in our council members. That's why we have the amazing staff that we have. So they need to know what we want, and we need to advocate for it.
So what she said. No, support projects. If there's a project that comes forward to the city and it's going to city council for a decision or the planning commission, and you feel so inclined, support it. That voice helps. It's really easy for groups to say no, people to say no to things. It's a lot harder to say yes. So look for places that you can say yes and add your voice there. In addition, think about all of the different things along the spectrum that you've heard this evening about different types of housing, different types of programs, different types of services, and think which of those is most important to you or most important to you for the community. We can't afford to do them all, or at least not all at once, so we've got to start somewhere. Think about what you would advocate for starting for.
Participate in the general plan process, and as you participate and as the tensions and the disagreements happen, and this is admonishment for myself as well, assume the best intentions of the people that you're talking to. Even if you deeply disagree with what they're saying, even if you're convinced that they have bad intentions, don't judge people by their worst moments. We all have them. And instead, let's try to just see the best in each other. Assume the best of each other.
All right, thank you. So we're going to move to a few questions that are here that were submitted. Kind of have broken down into some common theme that's running across the board here. So I think we'll touch on some of everything that's here this evening. The first one is maybe towards folks from the city or Bill. What is the number of people in Davis who, in your best estimate, who are currently homeless, have low income or moderate income? In that realm, there's a number of cards related to UC Davis and what the city is doing to work with the university to encourage more housing on campus. So I think the two-part to that question is, kind of the current status of unhoused situation in our city, and then I would maybe turn to our city partners at the end of the table to talk a little bit about how the city is working with the university for housing on campus. So I'll turn that over to I think Dana, you're probably the best one to answer the first part of that question.
So some of you may be familiar with what's called the point-in-time count. It's an annual census of the number of people that are unhoused in the city of Davis. The last census we completed, that was a full count, and that meant a count of all the people that were unhoused on the street and also in shelters. The last time we did that count in Davis was a year or two ago, and we were at about 800 folks. So we just completed our most recent count. And that count took place the last week in January. We're still tabulating the data, but what we're thinking in Davis is that number is probably somewhere around the same. We may have increased to about 850. We're not quite sure yet, but it's really, that's about the number of people that we're seeing that are unhoused on the street, unhoused in some form of shelter. And again, this is, the point in time count it's an estimate, because we don't count everyone, but it's what we see on one night and what we see through in that time period. So somewhere around 850.
And is that for Yolo County as a whole or
No.
for the city of Davis?
That's for Yolo County
As a whole. And what's that? Is about 180?
Yeah, somewhere
in
around.
the city of Davis.
Yeah, somewhere around that in the city, yes.
Awesome. Thank you, Dana. And then maybe towards with Kelly or Bapu, a conversation maybe a little bit about what the city has done to work with the university. We hear a lot about in the community about working with the university to really encourage them to build more housing on campus, and I think the city has made progress in that, and I'll turn to Kelly to touch on that.
So several years ago, the city and UC Davis negotiated a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, that required UC Davis to add student housing on campus to accommodate a portion of their new growth. So that was one thing that's been a very specific agreement that the city worked hard with campus to negotiate so that the campus could do more. The city has, not on campus, but the city has over the past number of years approved several different developments that are, I'll call them student-oriented. A lot of them are by the bed projects or products, which can be attractive for a university student. The more different types of housing that we are able to create and develop in the city, then the different types of products help people locate where they want to be. So student-oriented housing, students can be with other students, hopefully near campus. Sometimes that then removes them from other neighborhoods where it's harder for them to try to, 10 students packed into one house can be a tough thing. So those are a couple of the different things. I don't know if you want to add.
Just real quick, and Rob might know more, but I believe the MOU says 100% of new growth is dealt with by the university building new housing, and I think they've exceeded that actually. Of course, there's sort of backlog, but their Chancellor May has been a game changer for building student housing on campus.
Thank you. A question related to the Affordable Housing Fund that was talked about here this evening. I think it touches on everyone that's sitting up here. So if the Affordable Housing Trust Fund had a sustained source of funding, what would be your vision for a program that it could be supported by? So I know we have a variety of people here who either that work with the city or have partnerships with the city. And if there was that piece there, how would that sustainable source of funding in a fund benefit the work that you do with the city? I will turn to, Roberto, I'm going to turn to you just because you talked a lot about access to land and access to funds. And I know, if there's a way that connects to the work that you're doing, if there was a sustainable source and the city had that in a housing fund, how would that benefit mutual housing and the work that you do?
Well, an example might be the Wong family project in the rail yards in Sacramento, where the gap of funding was $2 million. That's not a huge amount of money. It did take us several years to raise the remainder of the money, but $2 million leveraged 150 units of housing. Pretty significant.
Thank you. Anybody else want to touch on the city just had all this money in an affordable housing fund, how you would want to spend it? No takers, huh? Nobody up here wants to spend this money in a foot? All right. Okay, well, here's a question. Okay, well, since you spoke up, Georgina, this question is going to go to you. Okay? All right. Bear with me. It's a beautifully written message, much better than my handwriting, but it's long, but we're going to get there. All right. The average home price in Davis for 2023 was $790,000. There are currently only 4 houses for sale in Davis today under $700,000 that do not have an HOA associated with it. There are no houses at the $460,000 range without an HOA. To buy a $600,000 home with 3% down, which is, I'm going to take this person's word for it, the payment would be $4,900 a month at 6.5% interest. The income needed to support that is $150,000 a year. So where are the homes going to come from that will be available for down payment assistance programs?
So the point of doing down payment assistance is it can be used on market rate homes as well as affordable homes. It's an absolute truth, and Dana already presented the information. There are only 125 deed-restricted affordable homes in this town. there isn't going to be a lot of turnover of those houses to provide an opportunity to many people. So the reason for a down payment assistance is to help folks get into a market rate home, for instance. Now, okay, at this moment, this particular juncture in time, there is not a $460,000 home on the market because there is no resale of the particular example that I gave. But trust me, there will be some, okay? I'm not throwing out numbers that aren't real. So going back to that 20,000, that 20,000 will get somebody in. Admittedly, some folks may have to, well, I'll say a single person, it's going to be tougher for sure. A married couple, two people that want a partner to buy a home to get a start. There's a lot of ways that people could actually get into a home. So don't discount the situation. I work with people and I get them in housing, believe me when I say that, but they need the help. I think the biggest thing is they can come up with the monthly money, especially if they combine with somebody else, if you're talking about a more expensive home. I mean, we've been talking about, I'll say family units, if you will, that have been from 3 to 7 people. You can put the monthly money together. The problem is the down payment and the closing costs. That's where the issue is. If you think back to that table I had up there, people aren't making enough money anymore to put money away, okay? They can't put that $20,000 away in a year, 2 years, 3 years, unless they're working a couple of different jobs. But it does happen. I have got clients that I have experienced it with. So again, I wouldn't impugn what I've been saying about down payment assistance. It's important, and there are houses out there, market rate houses, that it could work with. But it doesn't negate the fact that we need to build houses, and we need to build affordable homes, and we need to build market rate homes, frankly.
Thank you. The next question we have here is one that we've talked a little bit about at City Council, and I imagine it'll be coming forward at some point. So the question is, how about taxing vacant land within the city limits at a higher rate? Will this motivate owners to sell, build, or pay up? I'm going to turn to either our former mayor, who I imagine, has an answer to this. He's answered to most things, as I assume. He's awful quiet in the past little bit, or to Kelly, or to Vice Mayor Vitiello, to talk a little bit about the kind of. I mean, we hear about vacancy taxes, right? We hear about vacancy taxes around commercial properties. We hear about vacancy taxes on vacant land, and there are some definite procedures and things that need to happen in order to do that, to make it worth the tax itself, and some hurdles that would need to be jumped in order to do that. So I'm going to turn to my colleagues over here on the city side if they have, or if anyone else has something they want to throw in the hat on that.
So vacancy taxes do exist. They're generally used in larger cities with a lot of blight. So a property maybe that has been abandoned and isn't being cared for, and the city's trying to spur some sort of development on that property. We don't have quite that type of scenario. So a vacancy tax is perhaps something to look into, but there is also a cost related to oversight and enforcement, and trying to determine what the definition of a vacant property is. So it can get complicated, and we'd have to look at the cost benefit of the revenue that could be raised versus the cost it would take to actually implement such a policy or a tax. And it's a tax, so it has to be voted on.
Sure. Yeah, and we've had one city council item on that, so we have considered some options, and staff right now, I was told today, we're on the verge of sort of procuring a data set about how we're to monitor vacancies in commercial properties, because it's a lot easier to know vacant lots exist, but whether they're tenants in commercial properties is a lot harder. We think we have a solution for that, and it will come back before council.
Yeah, thank you. And I think Kelly touched on one of the major pieces. In order for the city to be able to impose a tax, I think that, as the question asked, that would be a motivator if you're using a stick instead of a carrot. That would need to go to voters in order to have that that rate passed. The current way it's set up, right, is that you can, if code enforcement goes out to the vacant land or they go out to the vacant property, they can charge the person who owns the property what the time was for that person to go out there. So in reality, it's not that much in terms of the motivation to try and get them to do something with it. But as Vice Mayor Vitiello said, we have our new economic development director on board, and we're tackling some of these issues because we hear a lot about vacant property and vacant storefront, things like that in our community. So it's definitely one that is on the radar. Another question that came up, we heard a bit about a revenue measure from Vice Mayor Vitiello. Can we hear a little bit more just about, let's hope and or say that it doesn't pass, let's hope that does not happen. What are some other ways that that Affordable Housing Fund can be funded? I know Kelly had some up there, but it's not that much money, right? There are not very many dollars that are in there. And what do we think would need to be in Affordable Housing Fund to have an impact? What do those numbers look like? Sure.
Well, if I had an answer to the first question, I'm not sure all of us would be sitting here. But the answer to the second question, Roberto just commented about $2 million gap funding for a project that he was working on. So when we've provided funding in the past for developers for a new for gap funding for affordable projects, you're talking $600,000, $700,000, $1 million. You're talking big numbers in order just to meet that gap and get that project over the hump and get it built. So we're talking fairly large amounts. I don't have the great solution of the best way to get additional funding, other than some of the ones that I provided.
So here are, I think, a comprehensive list of our options, actually. So there is the funding, just the normal funding process. Every year, City Council can allocate money through the general fund to the Affordable Housing Fund. Now, of course, there's a lot of competing uses. So really the viable pathway for that to happen is for our economy to grow sustainably and for more tax revenue to be coming in. So there's more room in the general fund to be giving predictably to the Affordable Housing Fund. There's also the possibility of a special tax specifically for housing. Special taxes are very difficult to pass because they require a 2/3 threshold. There is a constitutional amendment that will be on the ballot, the state ballot this year, that ACA won, introduced by our Assembly member Aguiar Curry, that would lower the threshold for approval for special taxes to 55% for local governments. So that's a very key measure in terms of the fiscal health of cities all over California. So please keep your eye on that one. And then there are grants. So there are some matching grants available. Dana and Iris would probably know a lot more about this, but there's kind of restrictions and constraints on accessing that money. But those are our options, getting money into the Housing Trust Fund and in terms of Affordable Housing Fund. So we keep calling it Housing Trust Fund, Affordable Housing Fund, just because the federal government has a Housing Trust Fund, so we're trying to use the phrase Affordable Housing Fund more to make it clear. In terms of money, we got $2 million a year from redevelopment agencies. That was 10 years ago. Times have changed and construction costs are higher. And I would say kind of a minimum floor that we need is about $3 million coming into that Affordable Housing Fund every year to make a difference.
Thank you. Question that we haven't heard a lot about, or a topic we haven't heard a lot about specific to demographics, and I think maybe, Roberto, you touched on some of the veteran housing that you guys that Mutual Housing is looking to do or is getting ready to embark on. So a question here just talking about, are there opportunities to provide and look at, maybe Dana too, or even Bill, around senior housing? Folks that have disabilities need a lot of ADA accessibility. And there are ways to, I guess, do you see that need in the communities that you work in? How big is that need? And then are there certain types of housing projects that are being moved forward to address those various parts of the continuum that are specific to those demographics?
Well, there's a huge need for senior housing, and I would say after those who are unhoused, the percentage of seniors is the next lowest economic earners, and so they have very high needs. But it's also, you can achieve more density by building for seniors. We're not having to build 3 and 4 family units, 3 and 4 bedroom units, which we do in Sacramento because there's a lot of large families. But you're building a lot of studios, 1 bedrooms, and a few 2 bedrooms. So you can achieve density in that way, which is hopeful. But there's a huge need.
Thank you. And I'm going to go to Dana and then to Rob. Dana, can you just touch on the current state? We had those numbers and generally you had up there, and then we talked about the PIT count. Maybe drill down a little bit if you're able to on last year's numbers, if those are there, if you have them around those populations.
Well, one of the trends that we're seeing, and that's in looking at the unhoused population, is the number of people that are unhoused that are over the age of 60. We have a number of people that are unhoused that have been chronically unhoused for a number of years. They're over the age of 60. And because of the conditions that they're facing on the street, they've got underlying conditions that are untreated, including mental health, but a lot of physical health conditions as well. So the type of housing that we would need for folks that are in that demographic to make sure that they are cared for, that their needs are cared for, and particularly for people that, like Bill mentioned before, that have been chronically unhoused for so long, it's very difficult for them to maintain housing. We're seeing an increased need for that.
Thank you, Dana. We'll pass it down to Rob.
Yeah, I'll see if I can be succinct about this. I think, obviously, for the senior, if we look at seniors, we need more. I think Eleanor Roosevelt is the last senior-oriented project that we built in the city. And I want to use that as a jumping off point to talk about how our city has developed large numbers of affordable housing. It has always been the 2,600 units that we referred to. Almost all of those are land dedication sites. They were developed because of peripheral development. Those developments aren't peripheral anymore. They're part of our city. That's how we got affordable here. Large developments, developers set aside land, and then nonprofit organizations came in using the land and possibly a grant from the city, from the Housing Trust Fund. They leveraged it for tax credits, and most of the units that are affordable in this city, that's how they were developed. So we need a housing trust fund. We need a housing fund, because we need to be able to put some seed capital in to leverage. But quite frankly, we need land sites that the city can actually control, in the sense of saying to a nonprofit, we need senior housing, so we will give you the land and we will give you $2 million, and you will build us 100 and some units of senior affordable housing. That's the way it's worked in this town. And we're not in a situation, the last 3 affordable properties that I think were built, Creekside came out of a land dedication from Mace Ranch. Bartlett Commons came out of a land dedication from the cannery. And Adelante came from a land dedication from Sterling. Yeah, I know, I see some groaning back there. That's how we've gotten affordable, is through land dedication. And so I don't know the full conclusion on that, but the way we've gotten it, the way we've gotten lots of it, is that way. And the Housing Trust Fund came along to support efforts so that we could leverage, so that the nonprofits and others could leverage a maximum amount of tax credits to make it work.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, that sounds great. So we're going to put Rob back on the spot, and I don't know if it's an appropriate spot for you to be in or be on, but we're going to start, and then maybe somebody else can jump in and answer the question. So there's, again, conversation and questions that have come forward this evening. That the largest stack of questions that have come forward are related to UC Davis. And, people are seeing development, seeing Orchard Park, others being built. And the question that has come forward is the housing that's being built to meet the needs of the MOU, is it actually affordable? Is it, in what they're putting forward, is it affordable to students in reality?
So I'm a low-level bureaucrat at the university. Don't be deceived by the fact that I'm a former mayor. That's the important point here. Here's what I can say. On my slide, I shared that there are, I think it's 600 students who are receiving monthly vouchers of $100, $200, or $300 for the on-campus housing at Primero Grove, Orchard Park, and the Green, far west side of the city. How's that happening? When those properties, the Green most recent and Orchard Park more recent, were developed, they were developed by nonprofits, and negotiations were that when they reached a certain level of occupancy, the nonprofit organization would kick money back to the university to provide for the vouchers. So the rents, if you can read the university's report on the rents for new properties, newly developed properties, not 30-year-old apartment buildings, new properties in the city, the university is below market rate for new development, not for 30-year-old development, for new development. In addition, we have the subsidy programs that I talked about, and we have state funds that we're using for emergency rental support that I mentioned, and hopefully we will be able to convert some of that into year-long rental subsidies. So I don't think it's an easy question to answer, but I can say that, well, what I just said is the facts, and 800 students receiving a voucher program. I'm not sure if Ian could tell us how many vouchers there are in the city of Davis that are not for students, Section 8 vouchers, but I think that's pretty competitive with the city. 800 vouchers going to students.
Thank you, Rob. Anybody else want to tackle the UC Davis housing question? No, nobody's raising their hands, huh? All right. All right, so.
By the way, I may get in trouble for some of the things I said, so maybe we could delete that part of it. Low-level bureaucrat.
Yeah, it's okay speaking facts. All right, so we're at that time. We have one last question. We're definitely over our allotted time. You know, it's hard oftentimes to, they say you never give a politician an open mic. And there's, you know, here tonight there are people who are so passionate and their work is so impactful that it's worth running over and hearing from you and the work that you do, and all of us experiencing that here with you this evening. So thank you again for all your work. I'm going to jump into this last question that was provided to us, and then we will, if you can do it like in a minute, that'd be great, and then we'll bring it back and close out. All right, so we've talked about an affordable housing fund here this evening. But looking at the bigger picture, if you could select one change today regarding housing, what would that be? This is more about what needs to change in the political landscape for housing, specifically around federal, state, or city laws in housing. So, do you want to start? Sure, we'll start down at that end and we'll work this way. Vice Mayor Vitiello.
No more detached housing. No more detached housing at all. Detached housing. No more.
Kelly?
This is specific actually to federal funding that we use. There are so many regulations and requirements on it that it makes it very, very complicated to use, and I wish that were simpler.
Well, and I'll add to that too. That's one of the reasons to have money in our housing trust fund. There's restrictions on how you use the money in a housing trust fund, but not the kind of reporting regulations and miasma of difficulty that federal funds and state funds offer. So a housing trust fund allows you to do more with the money. Not speaking as a bureaucrat, speaking just from reading and understanding what housing trust funds get used for. What would I like to see? I'd just like to see us all really engender and create the political will to get housing done. That's what I'd like to see. We need infill. There isn't a lot of room to do infill on. We're going to need to look outside the boundaries of our city, and I think we need to open our minds up to it. And We need to include people. We need to realize that we've made ourselves a very exclusive city, and we need to be more of an inclusive city.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a renter most of my adult life, and I think that the voices we heard earlier indicate that the exclusion that we experience is largely because we're not providing multifamily rental properties. We don't build them, we don't value them, we don't really want them, and it's causing us to be a community that values our homes for the sake of our retirements, as opposed to valuing our space for the sake of the health of our community. And so if I could change anything, it would be to so incentivize the development of high density rental properties so that the people who do the work in this community at 6 o'clock in the morning and at 12 o'clock at night could live in this community and rent spaces for themselves and for their children. That's what I would want.
Yeah, I think there just needs to be more housing development all across the state. I mean, one of the statistics I saw this morning was that there's 3.1 million housing units needed in the state of California as of today. So much more needs to be done. I think also what needs to be done too is that some of the laws impacting the building of the housing needs to be changed to make the building of the housing much more affordable.
I'm going to go back to what I spoke about earlier about vulnerable people. I'd like to see more yes in my backyard. I'd like to see more people be welcoming of all kinds of people moving into the neighborhood, being welcoming to them, and meeting people where they are. So.
In my dream world, I'll join Kelly Stackowitz and put all of the federal and state money into one bucket, and we go after it at one time, because we spend somewhere between 2 years, which is really fast, and 5 years typically to build affordable multifamily housing, and that's because we're chasing money in different pots, and we have to make the timelines line up. In my more pragmatic world, I'll join Vice Mayor Vitiello and bring in peripheral housing, and I will ask our friends from Habitat for Humanity of Greater Sacramento to join us. We've been collaborating together to build multifamily and single-family housing together, and if you were able to bring in that peripheral land, we could attack that pretty quickly and achieve density as well. And I would also encourage our friends at Habitat to no more detached housing. That's also a dream.
All of the above.
All right. Thanks, everybody. So in closing, let's do another huge round of applause for all of our panelists that are here this evening. And obviously, this would not have happened without the hard work and volunteer hours of the Interfaith Housing Justice of Davis. So please give them a huge round of applause as well. And I do believe that brevity is the soul of wit. So in the words of Reverend Connie Simon, we are all better together. Good night.